available today. So I'm here as the head of policy for wildlife and WWF to make these opening remarks. And I'm pleased to do so because I'm a botanist by background. So you're going to hear about an intriguing case about illegal trade in cacti. Yes, a plant. And it's probably the largest trafficking plant case in history. It resulted in the criminal prosecution of two plant traffickers, but also, and remarkably, concluded with a civil litigation holding the offenders responsible to remedy the harm they caused to nature. So today we're focusing very much on that aspect, reparation for harms against nature. And in doing so, we also bring into focus the rights of nature, which have been discussed more in the context of animals. But as you'll soon find out, if you didn't know already, this isn't a case that's directly related to us and WWF. But there are many reasons why we're interested in this case and why together we wanted to be part of this webinar. First of all, to show support for conservation litigation's work and to demonstrate unity in thinking. Secondly, it's an important example regarding the rule of law and the many facets of law enforcement that are relevant to the conservation mission. Thirdly, to have plants in the spotlight. And then various organizations, conservation organizations, ourselves, WCS and Traffic included, have expressed interest in civil litigation. We have used it on occasion, but this collaboration provides a platform to explore it further. And finally, because different countries have different laws and processes, but the principle is found in many countries. So now, without any further ado, I shall hand over to Jacob. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Coleman. Our involvement in this case started with me sitting, drinking my morning coffee, reading the New York Times, and I saw this brilliant piece by a journalist that many of you will know, Rachel Newer. And like so many of you, it really caught my attention. A really unexpected case because we don't see many cases of wildlife trafficking that focus on plants, let alone of this scale, of this magnitude. And this one is really remarkable. Over 1,000 plants, these cacti from one of the driest places on Earth. And most of these cacti in this genus, Capiopoa, threatened species, and importantly, species that are so slow growing because of the harsh environmental conditions that many of those that were confiscated in this case were over 100 years old. They've been dug up from most of them from the Atacama Desert in Chile, and then brought into Europe via countries like Romania and Greece for the international trade as ornamental plants and for export around the world, across Europe and to Japan for tremendous sums. Now, that New York Times article describes how the plants had been, the investigation unfolded, how they'd been found, and amazingly, how many of the plants had been not only confiscated, but with the help of many of the people on today's call, repatriated to Chile, to their country of origin, as part of a really remarkable situation. I think probably the first time a repatriation has ever happened for plants, in fact. And at the time of reading, a criminal investigation was underway. Now, this caught my attention because I'm not only an enthusiastic plant grower of many different kinds, but my research at Lancaster University has long focused on illegal wildlife trade. And for so long, my research was describing illegal wildlife trade, how networks work, describing species and markets. And I was really frustrated because as a scientist, describing this illegal wildlife trade wasn't doing a whole lot towards protecting those species. And over time, that's what provoked my interest in environmental law, and what led to my involvement and support in co-founding this organization, Conservation-Litigation.org, where we focus scientists, lawyers, activists on working together to use existing laws to hold offenders of environmental crimes, wildlife trade, illegal deforestation, mining, meaningfully accountable for the harm they cause. Now, what does this mean? It means that rather than just focusing on punishing an offender, we've been asking ourselves, what are the ways that we can hold them responsible for actions that might actually benefit nature? because an orangutan or a cactus doesn't much care about whether an offender goes to jail. The species is still declining. The species may still go extinct. So when I read about this case, I put down my coffee, I emailed Rachel and I said, can you please help put me in touch with people involved in this case? I think there might be further legal action here that could be interesting, that could help secure rights for nature. And she said, fortunately, she had interviewed exactly the right person for her article, who she put me in touch with, one of the world's leading cactus experts, chair of the IUCN's, that's one of the chairs of the cactus and succulent plant specialist group, Barbara Ghosh. And so I'd like to turn over to Barbara to describe to us a little bit about why she was involved and why this case matters.
Hi, hello everyone, and thanks Jacob for the introduction. So I would like to talk a little bit, or well, focus about some of the features that make cacti so remarkable, and from a biological point of view, why is this important for these plants? So the cactus family is endemic to the Americas. With the exception of one species. And we know that 31% of the around 1,500 species known to science, when we did the global cactus assessment, 31% were threatened with extinction, according to the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. So this level of threat is way higher than for mammals and birds, for example. And this group of plants is also very highly utilized. So more than 50% of cactus species are used for something by humans. And of the known threatened species, which are just under 500 species, 50%, more than 50% of them are used for horticultural purposes. So these plants have long been sought after by collectors, and they are very charismatic for many reasons. Their shapes, their forms, how they look, their flowers, of course. And in the specific case for Copiapoas, we recently reassessed all the genus, like 32 species and seven subspecies, and 92% of them are threatened with extinction, according to this last assessment. So these plants, all cacti, but in a specific Copiapo, are threatened by many different factors, like land use change for mining, for urban development, climate change, more recently, like the extended droughts. But poaching is one of the main drivers of extinction for Copiapo and for many other cactus species. So the fact that this case make offenders pay for the damage they cause for these species is quite remarkable, because as Jacob mentioned, in many cases we hear that people are jailed, but for us doing conservation on the ground, that doesn't help much in making better or repairing the damage that has been done to the plants. So in general, cacti grow, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why poaching can be so damaging for these plants. So as Jacob mentioned, these plants grow really, really slowly. And because of the harsh environmental conditions they grow in, they have very low recruitment. So they have very little individuals that incorporate into populations. And it takes many, many years. And as he mentions, a lot of the plants that were confiscated in Italy, they were way over 100 years old. So just to give you an idea how much this costs in terms of money for the specialist group and the people that collaborated in the repatriation from Italy to Chile of these plants. So we pay over €400 just for transport and for materials to make sure that the plants got to Chile in a okay state. And this doesn't include the cost of people's time like Andrea that was heavily involved, or the botanical garden in Milan, or my time. And of course, it also had a cost associated in Chile for repotting the plants, for building a facility to house them once the plants were acclimatized to after traveling back from Italy. So, and obviously this has very bad implications in nature, in their natural environments, because if you take a few mature specimens when you have very low recruitment, this is obviously going to decline the recruitment of new individuals in the populations further. And it obviously affects people that trade plants in a sustainable and legal way, which is another remark of this case. So a lot of this work was done with Andrea, and I think it would be really good if he talks a little bit about his side of the story.
Thanks so much, Barbara. I just want to say before we head over to Andrea, when we spoke, mid 2021, it became clear that remedies were necessary in this sort of case, right? Whether it was the costs of moving the plants, but it was something far greater. You raised issues of the research that was going to be needed, the long-term care of these plants, the impacts for public education in Chile as well as in Italy. And so it was very clear that with such profound harm, there was a very legitimate moral case for seeking meaningful remedies. And of course, as you're saying now, what you told me, though, was that there was someone that we had to speak with first, someone who'd not only been involved in the case, but also someone who is perhaps one of the greatest nurserymen that I know, who can, seeds, cuttings, you name it, make them thrive and bloom. But one of the things that stands out to me about Andrea Catabriga is that he's not only committed to the plants, but he's also committed to the profession, which is that if you are interested in growing and enjoying wildlife, plants in this case, you may do so, but you have to do it sustainably and legally. And for many taxa, including cacti, that is possible. But if you want to enjoy them, grow them, don't steal them. If you want to enjoy them, conserve them, don't destroy them. And so, as I understand it, that's been Andrea's mission in the way he frames his work, but also why he founded this group ABC that has been central to this legal case. ABC, l'Associazione per la Biodiversità e la sua Conservazione, is a small Italian NGO that Barbara helped us to connect with, along with Andrea. And we reached out to them because we recognized that, wait a minute, you work on cactus conservation, you were involved in the case, you have a mission to protect cacti, and you're in Italy. That may mean that you have a legal standing opportunity to speak for the plants. So that's why we reached out to Andrea. So with that introduction, Andrea, we'd love to hear more about ABC and your work.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. Can you hear me? It's okay. Oh, I founded ABC Association in 2002, a lot of years ago, because the main aim of this decision was that I got my graduation in natural sciences. I was very interested in cultivation of the plants since child. And so the two things led to the idea to found a little botanical garden, because I put together a lot of interesting plants, all belonging to the CITES kinds, the endangered species. The passion was to propagate the plants. Some important people in Italy, environmental people, suggested and supported me in the founding of this small association. And so we started our history. then it became also the nursery. So my involvement in the propagation of the plants. But also in this case, my perspective was to prosecute always the legal way, to let possible to offer plants on the market that were propagated in artificial condition in the best legal way. And for this, I was helped and supported by Maurizio Saieva, that was the scientist responsible for the European region for a while. Thanks to Professor Saieva of Palermo, I published also some little booklet to explain the people in Italy what is the meaning of the word endangered, of the education to the consumption of the plants, the support to support the sustainable propagation of the plants. For this, the two things, the conservation, that is a more environmental, scientific argumentation, I tried to join together with the idea of an ideal nursery, an ideal enterprise that can live and work well with plants. Because in this way, you can really make an action for the conservation of the plants indirectly. But meaning the market is the real cause of the illegal collection of the plants. If you offer an alternative to the wild collected plants, was a possibility for many people to choose the right way to conduct inspection in the cultivation of the plants. So in the years, I found a lot of problems because on the part of the world of the business, of the people involved really in the big nurseries, I was an enemy because I was supporting CITES. CITES is a well-done system. What's difficult is to apply the rules. But if everybody would work, supporting this idea of the conservation, it was perfect. Big business. It was interesting. And in fact, if you go to see what happens in the market, the trade in wild collected plants is really not so important for the big nursery. It can become sometimes a case that you find these plants in the big nursery. They prefer to stay legal, of course, because it's a big problem in the management of the nurseries. So I see that in the years, the illegal collection, the illegal market take its own independent development. It was not really related to the nursery, the business world, even if it can join sometimes. Not all the people is so interested to make everything clearly because they want to earn easily. And this is now what I do. I offered my support to the police for any case of consultancy to see which kind of plants are on the market. And like Operazione Atacama is one of the several other situations that in which I was involved to give my support in the recognition of the plants, to see if the plants were coming from the wild, and eventually to prosecute the people. But of course, Operazione Atacama was to me the best of the experience ever done. It was possible for me to meet Barbara, the UCN people, Chilean people working for these plants, interested in this conservation of the plants. And today, I have to tell you, we know only recently now the results of the trial against the people that make this. And some big nursery men in Italy say, thank you, Andrea, for what you made. But nobody of them ever denunciated. All of them knew about that. But they say to me, "Thank you, Andrea, for what you've done." It's okay for me. I'm really happy. I prefer not to join the big mixed group of nurserymen that works in a not so clear way. But I'm alone in this, and I'm happy anyway.
Thank you, Andrea. Oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
It's okay. It's okay. No, just one thing. I was very impressed by the words written by the journalist for BBC, because she interviewed me, and at the end she found the focus of the time of the situation, the idea that plants, in this case, special case, have been considered as individuals, not as species. And this, for me, is very important, no? Because the pictures taken, offered from the web, no? You see these copiapoas with 100, 200 years old. And the people can confront with these specimens and can understand what's a terrific situation. The plants 200-year-olds were taken out from their wild, from their environment, and the people can feel this problem. And while the same people, if you tell them, oh, look, now there is a Pilosocereus that is going extinct in Florida because the climate change is extinguishing it, but people cannot understand what is a Pilosocereus, what is a species, what is a population. This is very interesting. I think that it would be important to start to focus on this aspect of the action taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And I think you will all see why when we spoke with Andrea, we recognized not only his expertise, but also that he was willing to step up. There was already a criminal investigation underway by the prosecutor in Ancona in Italy. We knew that was happening. Andrea and others had already supported that process in terms of identifying species, helping rescue and repatriate the plants. But there was something more here about the remedies. But a cactus cannot go to court. Some non-Italian guy who's interested in environmental law cannot go to court and speak for cacti in Italy. But ABC, an organization with a specific mission to protecting succulent and cactus plants in Italy, could. And the man behind the organization, Andrea, the founder, was willing to stick his neck above the parapet and say, no, I will be a public face of trying to seek remedies. Now, I don't think that any of us necessarily knew what form that was going to take. Andrea, and I are not lawyers. We knew, though, that Italy had provisions that might allow this, but we didn't have an Italian lawyer yet. Via our network, we were very lucky to find one of the world's most recognizable law firms. DLA Piper was also intrigued by this story and recognized that remedies were necessary in this case. Now, they don't normally take pro bono cases like this. They tend to work on human rights. If they work on environment, they do things like environmental policy. They don't go to court in nature cases. But they were willing to do something here because they recognized that there was an opportunity, something interesting. And so after years of investigation of this criminal prosecution in Italy, we added on ABC in Italy as a civil plaintiff in this case. And that case finally started in December 2023. That was the first hearing of the case in the court of Ancona. And we were excited. And as our case developed, something came to our attention. And that was that we were not the only team of lawyers and scientists interested in this case, perhaps unsurprisingly. Things were also happening in Chile. And Of course, that presented difficulties because the defendants were in Italy. Perhaps through a bizarre, certainly careless turn of events, one of the defendants returned from Italy to Chile, where someone very special was waiting for him. His return to Chile was not unnoticed by Dr. Marcela Toledo of Chile's National Prosecutor's Office. So before we get back to our case in Italy, and I promise we will get there, I'd like to turn to Dr. Toledo to tell us a little bit about the parallel legal case that was happening in Chile. Marcela?
Bien, buenos días a todas. Voy a hablar en mi idioma, en español. Voy a hablar lo más lento posible para que los traductores no tengan mayores inconvenientes. Me presento, soy Marcela Toledo, soy abogada y soy la directora subrogante de la Unidad de Delitos Medioambientales y Lavado de Dinero en Chile.
Aspects in Chile, top themes in Chile. This investigation was hugely important here in Chile, bearing in mind that it was about an offense to the law CITES, this international treaty which Chile has adopted as a law and incorporated to our internal laws and the CITES Convention. How did we learn about this situation? Because as you know, Italy had approved a legislation on Copiapó from Chile. There is a region with this name. It is a province, Copiapó in Chile, in such way that this
portaba una SIM card de teléfono
there was
proveniente de
a SIM
Chile.
card of a telephone from Chile, so we communicated with the Chilean authorities and determined that between January 2013 and December 2019, on what was investigated here in Chile, there were many travels to our countries. So this is an activity that was developed in many occasions. And what was determined or established is that they had extracted approximately 1,000 Chilean species or from Copiapodas, and this could have could be worth over 2 million euros at the time. So we held the investigations in Chile, and we issued an order of arrest against this individual, and he went back, but he was back to Italy. And this was very important because as a product of the investigations and the order that was issued by a court in Chile asked for the extradition of this subject, this Italian individual, and his lawyers, and they wanted to speak about what this process of extradition means, because it's not easy. It requires cooperation among bodies, because it has to do with the legislation which is applicable to him, to a deed, but it's beyond our knowledge as lawyers. So we need to unite these two worlds, the scientific world in addition to the legal world. And this enabled in Chile, and enabled also that we could require through the Chilean prosecutor's office the extradition of this individual, and it was granted. And it was this individual which had this order of arrest and extradition. He tried to enter Chile again, and when this happened, he was held again. Probably he was trying to do again what he had done before in such way that when he was arrested, this allowed us to take him to court, and he was found guilty. For the scientists, we speak about the importance of attaining, in this case, a case of a court decision for the environment, because in Chile, and regarding the procedures and what the consequences, what they really mean, this is so important. It is extremely important because it implies a sign that we give to these individuals that held these offenses, because they learn that there are consequences and international consequences, not only in Chile, but also in Italy. This individual was found guilty, and he was deported from our country and prohibited to enter our country for 10 years. So what's the most important aspect for us in this case in Chile? First of all, it gave place to an international procedure in a crime which is considered, I won't say a minor crime, but of a minor relative importance, vis-a-vis, for instance, organized crime with drugs, homicides, and so on. So these procedures are also working for all types of crimes, not only for the ones that have most impact in the societies, but it requires going beyond the idea that this is a minor crime and that investigation should not be invested on with so many resources, because it has an impact in the environment, organized crime internationally. So the denouncement and the investigations are important, and they must be assessed, and the legal order must be activated. The courts, the prosecution offices of the countries of where these individuals are holding their activities. This is, we're very glad about the importance and the interest that this case has attained, both from the standpoint of legal aspects and also from the conservation standpoint as regards the original species of our country. Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this webinar.
Thank you very much, Marcela. And you're absolutely right. One of the things that makes this case so extraordinary is that there were these parallel criminal cases happening in two countries and a civil suit happening. So this was, because these are not mutually exclusive. They're not mutually exclusive in terms of the two jurisdictions. They're not mutually exclusive in terms of an approach focused on punishment versus an approach focused on remedies. They absolutely go hand in hand in terms of seeking justice. And actually, Italy, like many countries, and I believe Chile probably does as well, we've yet to explore it in depth, I hope we'll be able to, has these types of legal provisions that allows us via different pathways, they're different in different countries, to hold offenders liable, responsible for harm in different ways. As I mentioned, the case in Italy had the criminal component, which was brought by the public prosecutors in Italy. And then ABC was represented privately as a civil plaintiff within that criminal case, represented by DLA Piper. And our colleague, who's an Italian lawyer, Francesca Falco, who is not from DLA Piper, she was not involved in the case in that way, but she's been advising us throughout the process, is going to explain to us a little bit more about how the Italian public prosecutor and our pro bono lawyers representing ABC worked this case. So over to you, Francesca, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jacob. It's great to be here. So yeah, I would just conclude this interesting presentations with a focus on the legal frameworks around this trial in Italy. So what makes the case so important, in my view, is that it showcases really a kind of innovative and creative approach to enforce environmental liability in the Italian context. As many of you know, environmental liability is a core principle of European Union environmental law. And it's a simple concept. So if you harm the environment, you should be held accountable and compensate the damages. But thanks to a directive of the European Union, all countries in the EU have laws to enforce this principle, but it's not always easy. And Italy is not a place where this is particularly easy. Only the Ministry of Environment can bring the formal claims for environmental liability and demand reparations in the public interest. So all others, NGOs, individuals, even local authorities cannot file such formal claims. They can only seek compensation for harm that they themselves have suffered, whether financial or moral. And here is the key point. In this case, ABC and the DLA lawyers used the right of ABC to claim moral damages in an ongoing criminal proceeding to push for what, in effect, was an acknowledgement of the environmental liability of the offenders. So and the way that the claim was structured made very clear that this was the objective. ABC asked for damages based on the harm that was caused to their mission as an NGO, which is the conservation of rare cacti. And most importantly, they stated in the claim itself that any compensation awarded would be used to support conservation, to support research on the affected species, support actions to protect the plants that were repatriated to Chile, promote public awareness on the cactus conservation, support ex situ conservation of the affected species. So in other words, the focus was very much on compensating the harm done to biodiversity and not just the NGO itself. And that approach worked. It was well received by the court that awarded in the end 20,000 euros in compensation. And as you said before, even being allowed as an environmental NGO to file a civil claim in the criminal case was a challenge because many conditions had to be fulfilled to have legal standing. So this alone was a significant achievement, in my view, on top of the awarded compensation. So maybe also a few words on the verdict. Beyond this compensation to ABC, the two defendants then also received prison sentences of 1.5 years and 1 year. There were two defendants, and also fines. And an interesting point here is that in Italy, a short term of imprisonment like this one can be suspended. And but in this case, the court made the suspension conditional on the payment of the fines and the compensation to the NGOs. So this also shows how the civil claim played a role in ensuring that the criminal case had real material consequences for the convicted person. Yeah. So overall, this was a big deal for Italy. And they proved that creative legal strategies, in particular using this moral harm claims, can be used to hold effectively environmental offenders accountable. And I think, it matters also beyond Italy. Globally, there are very few legal victories of this kind, and there was a recent success in France, but in general, the rulings of this kind are very rare. But the good news is that, as you said before, similar legal avenues exist in many countries. Conservation-Litigation, I know, has explored these options in China, in Uganda, Indonesia, and in all of them, there are ways to advance environmental liability. So yeah, I think you will talk about it now. So I'll pass the floor to you, Jacob, to continue on this point. Thanks.
Thanks, Francesca, for that summary. A summary, yeah, very synthetic, because in fact, a number of different hearings and twists and turns and delay tactics. This case, because it's a criminal case, and in Italy, as in Chile, as Dr. Toledo mentioned, this is considered a relatively minor case, a minor offense, even though it's critically, endangered species, threatened species, cacti older than elephants, than the eldest elephants. This is still considered relatively minor. And so the statute of limitations is quite tight. And the case had to be, according to the Italian procedures, had to be completed by the time of 5 years from the initial investigation until the completion of the case. Now, this creates the perverse incentive for the defendant to delay at any cost, and delay they did. So this case was finally handed a verdict literally days before the completion of that 5-year statute of limitations, when indeed we had lost hope. We thought that the procedural, the bureaucratic, and the delay tactics were going to lose. And so in early February, when we got this news, we were not only delighted, but genuinely surprised. And now comes the next process, which is, of course, waiting the payment of the funds to ABC. And what's significant here is that those funds, this moral harm, which is a concept that doesn't exist in all countries, but as Francesca also mentioned, there's a similar case, for example, in France, is kind of a bucket, right? For harm to mission, it's abstract, it's unclear. But again, because we were discussing with Andrea and with Barbara and with colleagues, the point here was never about making money for Andrea, right? He wasn't requesting cash so that he could stick it in his bank account. He was requesting funds because there were specific actions that were needed to address all of the types of harm that Barbara described at the beginning of the session. And so these funds will now be used by ABC to support research, to support those plants that have been repatriated, the ex situ conservation in Chile, to support public education in Chile and in Italy about this case. And let's face it, how many people realize how threatened cacti are? Or how many people realize that cacti can be 200 years old? When we harm these individuals, we had all these different types of diverse cascading harms that we can call moral harm. But now the point is to use those funds to actually operationalize things that are going to support the conservation of these species. And that is the celebration of this case, why we wanted to share it with you. Now, I'll be honest, the case is imperfect. We learned a lot. It was long, it was more difficult. Andrea will tell you more frustrating and stressful than at times it seemed worth it. But it's also a very rare example, as Francesca mentioned, and I think an important one, because it illustrates how we can creatively use existing laws. And of course, the laws are different in every country, but there are opportunities, there are hooks that we can use to hold offenders meaningfully accountable. And that's important because usually, even in the very best case scenario of illegal wildlife trade or illegal pollution or deforestation, in the best case scenarios, the offender gets caught. In the best case scenario, the offender maybe gets prosecuted in criminal court. In the best case scenario, the offender maybe gets imprisonment, maybe gets a fine, usually a quite small fine or a suspended sentence, right? We go through all of this effort to use criminal tools, and they are important, but they're often inadequate because even in our best case scenarios of meaningful punishments, what happens to nature? What happens to the public good? The harm that those offenders cause is left for us and nature to bear. They're not held accountable for it. And so one of the things that our network, Conservation-Litigation, does is work with lawyers around the world to identify those legal opportunities. When I first started this area of work as a frustrated researcher, looking for justice, I figured that these cases must be rare because the laws to allow them did not exist. But what we're finding in our analyses is that these types of opportunities are actually found around the world. The procedures are different. The details are certainly different, but the principle is the same, which is that if you break it, you should fix it. And there are laws that allow us to help to do this. And even though the laws are common, though, the cases are still very rare. And this is the policy practice gap that we see in so many areas of life. And let's face it, I'm not quite sure why, but humans love to write, humans and NGOs and government folk love to write laws. We love to write new policies. But for the most part, we expend far less effort on operationalizing those laws in policies, especially and unfortunately often in countries that hold some of the most remarkable biodiversity. Through our legal analyses, we found, for example, in Uganda, some incredible legislation to hold offenders liable. Provision not used. In the Philippines, not used. Liberia, the best legislation we've seen, not used. Provisions in India, barely used at all. And so across these cases, we're working to identify plaintiffs. We're working with lawyers to do the hard work of the detailed legal analyses to figure out how do we develop this type of case? Because imagine if we could actually start to more widely hold offenders accountable. Large-scale illegal wildlife traders, companies committing illegal logging, illegal mining, pollution. What if we could see more cases holding them to account, holding them accountable for restoring habitats, for repatriating plants and animals, for caring for them into the future, maybe for reintroducing them, for supporting public education, for issuing public apologies? We think that that would be really significantly transformative. Transformative not only in individual cases like this one, but transformative to how offenders, future offenders, and companies calculate their losses, the deterrent effects. Transformative for how the public understands harm and how the public understands remedies. How, as Andrea referred to the fact that the public might actually recognize that a cactus is an individual, as well as a population, as well as a species. So this case is but a small, if important, example of how, with basically zero budget, huge generosity on a lot of people's time, and creative use of existing laws, we can start to see that transformative potential be realized. So thank you all for your time. Thank you to our geographically and thematically diverse speakers, to our translator, of course, as well as to the co-hosts of this event. We really felt encouraged that they were willing to lend their names to this, because we feel that, and they feel that it reflects the importance of this case and the potential of this approach across jurisdictions and across contexts. So thank you all, and we fortunately have some time for questions, which I'd like to turn. I'm just going to look through these very quickly. Francesca, there's a question here about the case in France. Do you feel comfortable very briefly mentioning on this? If not, I'm happy to. Please go. The case in France that was asked about was a case of illegal fishing. All right, please go ahead, Francesca.
No. Yeah, I just so I was muted, but I was indeed saying it's the part de Calanque. But please go. Yeah.
Please feel free to interject. But this was a case of illegal fishing in a national park, and within that legal framework, the park was the plaintiff along with the criminal prosecution, and they sought for moral harm to their reputation as well, because they said that this illegal fishing in their park was also, and especially because the case got so much public profile, was harming their reputation. But importantly, when they were calculating how much money they wanted, they were actually looking at what is the cost of monitoring the protected area. And that is how they used that to kind of calculate how much money they wanted to claim back from these offenders, so that indeed they could reinvest it back into better protecting that park. Can you tell us, Francesca, though, a little bit, or perhaps Marcela, if you have it in Chile, more about the concept of moral harm, how that's understood? Marcela, do you have this concept of moral harm in Chile?
Sí, lo tenemos, pero raramente aplicable.
Rarely, it is rarely or scarcely applicable to this type of offense. For instance, the environment. In general, they're related to civil crimes or other offenses, or other, for instance, against life of individuals or their property, but as regards environmental
And
aspects,
what
it's
about
still
what about
scarce.
in Italy? Can you describe to us a little bit more about how you understand moral harm?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I can. It's very similar also as what Marcela said. Also, in Italy, it's not commonly used in environmental case. That's why this is a creative way to use this. It's just in civil claims, it's always or often used as together with when claiming for monetary compensation to add for things like reputation or other items that is not easy to put a money a value on it, a monetary value on it, but it's rarely used for environmental liability. And now it's starting to be used more precisely because the environmental liability in the public interest cannot be it's not open to claims for individuals and NGOs, and so this is a way we can kind of break into this different types of proceedings.
Great, thank you, Francesca. Coleman, please go ahead.
I would echo what Francesca's saying, that it's used more to in the hope that at the very least the judge will take more seriously any monetary or reputational loss. And you basically you throw in a couple of extra things, knowing that you have a better chance of winning on the ones where you think you have a stronger case that it's easier to convince a layperson of. It would be, we tried it on with that approach once, but we've subsequently settled the case when I was in Ireland. I think if somebody smashed a wall of the Colosseum, everybody would accept that there was moral harm, that there was public harm. And not because, like plants or animals, there are living individuals that are affected. It's because it's part of Italy's heritage and part of the world's heritage, and nobody would have any argument with that. I would be surprised if a judge rejected that argument. But as Francesca says, we haven't really used it as much in the environmental sphere, and when we have, it's mostly been centered around animal welfare. I also just draw attention to Mary Morrison's question about the assets, were there proceeds of this crime, and what happened to those? Although I do know that directing the proceeds of a crime to the victims of the crime is complicated and hardly ever happens in reality.
Marcela, was this something that was discussed in Chile, the proceeds of crime? Or that you've seen done in other environmental cases?
Sorry, I didn't understand the last part of the question.
Whether the proceeds of crime, in this case, we know the assets were the plants were sold. Many of them had already been sold. Was there a discussion about proceeds of crime from the Chilean perspective?
Sí lo fue, pero lo que pasa es que esta investigación fue tremendamente particular y en general se centró más bien en determinar
on a certain
el hecho de
on the
lograr
fact
demostrar que este sujeto
of
había
demonstrating that the
ingresado
subject
a
had
Chile varias
entered
veces y que
Chile
producto de
many
ese
times,
ingreso
and as a product
había
of his
traído
entering the country, he
estas
had
especies para luego
taken this
llevarlas
species
a
to
Italia y en
Italy,
Italia
and in
comerciar
Italy he would
hacia
trade
otros
them
países.
toward
Entonces,
other
lo que nos ha
countries.
quedado de
So
esta
what
investigación es que
what
evidentemente
left
hay
for us
otros
in this
aspectos que
investigation? Of
también
course,
tienen que
there are other
tratarse.
aspects which must be
Esta fue la
approached as well.
primera, no la
This was
primera investigación, pero
this was not
sí
the first
una que tuvo una
investigation, but
magnitud
one that had
como la que
a
la que hemos
magnitude, so
visto.
to speak,
Entonces, en
as we have
general,
seen. So
se
in
centró
general
más
terms, it was more
en estos
focused
aspectos que
on these
permitían
aspects
acreditar
which
la
enabled
autoría del
to
sujeto, la
work with
participación
the subject and
en
his
un delito
authorship and
medioambiental para lograr
participation
condenarlo.
in this environmental crime so that he could be
Well, I think my impression is that the
condemned.
Italian investigation was similarly focused on many details that, the establishing the basic facts of the case, for example, demonstrating that they were even from Chile in the first place, rather than grown in a greenhouse in Italy. Maybe, Andrea, could you speak very briefly about the depth of the investigation that you understood in terms of even proving the provenance of the plants?
Yeah.
Because I know even that was a huge enterprise, wasn't it? A huge effort.
But an expert eye can recognize our plants that come from the wild, of course. No, because we are experienced. We see exactly what means because we see the change of the plants into the wild, into the captivity. The plants develop very devil spines and they lose the cork skin that is caused by the sun and the sand, wind. But of course, we search for a scientific proof. And so we were very happy to find the director of the Botanical Garden in Milan that was able to establish the correct analysis. They found particles of the soil into the roots of the plants and they analyzed them and they find with the very advanced mineralogic analysis that the soil was exactly coming from that location in the Atacama region. This happened with several plants. But we had to try the proof. But we knew that the plants came from the wild because we knew that this man was doing that job since years. He was offering any kind of succulent, cacti especially, coming from the wild, not only from Chile, but also from Mexico. What happens is that Chile now is the top of the location for cacti, for rare cacti. Copiapoas became very important. And I suppose that if he go back to Chile in the last September, when he was arrested by Chilean authorities, was because people were asking him plants. I think that the plants were already sold. He had just to go there to pick the plants up again. And at the end, I think that I have first of all to thank the Chilean judiciary because the punishment that Chile was really effective. He decided to exclude his regress to Chile for 10 years. Okay, he also was asked to pay a fee, but this fee is ridiculous. Also from Italian government, he was judged and he had to pay. But this money is nothing for him because the sum of money asked by Chile is about 10,000 euros, was 5 plants. 5 of the plants that he was selling or that he sold was enough. So, but the real problem for him is to go back into Chile. And I think that it will be a new story now, from now to the future. People will be more brave collecting plants. I can see also now plants coming from Chile of copiapoas sold in Japan. It's common, more and more common, because the prices of these plants, not only the wild collected copiapoas from Atacama, but also from the small copiapoas produced by seeds, has become very expensive. And I think this was an effect, a secondary effect, a side effect of this situation. All the people want these plants because they have the feeling that the plants are the best, the most interesting investments in money. So this is a side effect, but we have to face this also.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm conscious of the time, so if anyone needs to go, please feel free. And I just want to add that if anyone, if there are cases in your jurisdictions that you feel are appropriate, if you'd like to explore these things further, we're always receptive to discussions. as you see in the case today, you know, this started with an informal conversation with Barbara, with Andrea, and developed into something far greater. And we're always receptive to those types of collaborations. With the cognizance that of course it's not necessarily easy or fast, and it takes effort, but that we really think that it's an additional tool that exists in many countries that's been underutilized. So if you need to go, please feel free. But I would like to ask just a few more questions. Barbara, there's several questions in the chat about the repatriation, how it was initiated, how it was achieved, how is this possible? Could you tell us a little bit more about that and also the future of these plants themselves?
Sure. So it was a little bit complicated to start with because you know how to work out which person to contact was not straightforward. But Andrea in Italy, you know, he had very good links with CITES people. So we had Andrea dealing with the legal part of things in Italy and contacting all the people, and the person in the director of the botanical garden in Milan, who was willing to temporarily house the plants while we found the funds to take them to Chile, right? So I remember first discussing with Andrea, you know, like, what should we do? And for me, it was like straightforward, like these plants should go back to Chile. They belong to Chile. It's part of their biodiversity patrimony, you know, like, but how do we do that? We'll have to find out. So the first thing that we needed to ask was if the Chilean government wanted them back. So we contacted Pablo Guerrero, who is a specialist on cacti. He's also a member of the specialist group, you know, to direct us to the right person. And you know, after a series of letters sent to many people, you know, we got yes, we want them back from the Chilean authorities. And then one of the main issues was who's going to pay for the repatriation, you know? And in my head, it was just like these plants have been out of habitat for probably over a year, you know, so we cannot just be hanging here just waiting for someone to donate the money. So I started raising the funds to send the plants back. And it was just like lucky that the specialist group had received a donation from another grower, seller in the US, you know, that does things ethically. And I asked her, you know, would you agree? We were short by $1,000 to pay for the whole thing, you know. So between a grant that we had got for another project that got stalled because of COVID, you know, we asked the donor if we could use those funds to repatriate the copiapoas. They agreed to it, and then these other donations. So we got the plants back as soon as possible, but obviously there was a lot of like phytosanitary hurdles that we had to jump, you know, and but Andrea was buying like paper to wrap them and the boxes, and you know, so it was a learning process. And looking into the future, I think it would be easier to draft like a protocol to send plants back.
Thanks, Barbara. That also really speaks to all of the hidden work that cases like this involve. And fortunately, we have folks like all of you to put in that labor. But it's also, of course, unfortunate that it falls on the backs often of individuals. Marcela, I would like to ask about the costs borne by Chile, and whether, to your knowledge, there are legal, you know, for example, you know, there's hundreds of plants now, or as I understand, a greenhouse had to be constructed. What about those costs to Chile? Has there been any consideration, or as you understand, is there even a legal avenue in Chile for seeking remedies for this type of harm?
En Chile, en particular en este caso, estos cactus están siendo conservados ahora por la autoridad
These plants are being kept by the sanitary agency, which is the forest agency of the country. They have a place with the necessary conditions for conservation, the species, and their development. But this is an extremely important topic in Chile because there is a lack or a gap as to where these species will be conserved. Since we have these processes, then we will have the confiscations and the repatriation, and there is a deficiency or difficulty in terms of their conservation, particularly as regards who will be managing them and how they'll be managed. So constantly we are meeting and dialoguing with the authorities, different ones, which are related to CITES convention, to revise these processes because there is here an associated cost which is necessarily must be borne by someone or come from somewhere. So it will be paid by an agency or body of the state. So we begin to distribute where does it come from the sanitary authority, from the police. Sometimes even the police is the first authority who will be confiscating or which will take it somewhere. So they must conserve it, preserve it as it is under their authority and manage them. So we do have an issue here with the institutional aspect of this process. We're working it out and dialoguing, and so far what we have done is try to see it on a case-by-case basis. We do not have enough resources to this point in time to cope with all these situations, but in general, we have solved them based on the goodwill of all the participating stakeholders, so to speak, and on the energy that they all bring into seeking a discussion and an adequate place for the maintenance and preservation of the species. But we're still lacking an institutional framework for this.
The case, whether it's chimpanzee rehabilitation centers or botanic gardens or ministries of forests that have to restore or Ministry of Marine Affairs that has to clean up oil. So often this is borne by the taxpayer, by the NGO, by the donor, by the individual. And I guess the question we're asking is how do we start to balance that out, particularly when we're dealing with offenders, individuals, organized crime, corporations that could actually afford to pay. So at any rate, thank you again to everyone who joined, to our incredible speakers, co-hosts and translator. I hope this maybe inspired one or two of you to consider being a plaintiff in a case. And if so, you know where to come. We'd be glad to have a conversation with you. So thanks very much for your time. And I look forward to many future discussions and many future legal cases together.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jacob.
Thank you.
Marcela, Andrea, Barbara, Coleman, Francesca. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Alice. Thanks so much. Thank you for your help with the translation and